This is the visual they tried to bury before the sun came up. Picture this. A frozen pipeline valve somewhere in northern Alberta cranked shut by order of the Canadian federal government. No gas flowing, no warning, no negotiation. The digital pressure gauges on the American side dropping to zero in real time. As of 6 a.m. Eastern this morning, Wednesday, March 4th, 2026, the Government of Canada has officially activated emergency export restrictions on natural gas shipments to the United States. For the first time in the 65-year history of the integrated North American energy grid, a NATO ally has weaponized its energy supply against the United States of America. This is not a diplomatic spat. This is not a tariff skirmish. This is an energy embargo from the country that supplies 98% of all U.S. natural gas imports. The shockwave hit before the New York Stock Exchange even opened. Natural gas futures spiked 41% in overnight trading. The Dow futures plunged 800 points. Heating oil contracts in the Northeast are already pricing in a 60% increase by next week. We are talking about 8.4 billion cubic feet per day of natural gas that just stopped crossing the border. We are talking about petrochemical plants in Louisiana and Texas that cannot operate without Canadian feedstock. We are talking about electrical grids in Michigan, Minnesota, and Wisconsin that rely on Canadian gas for 35 to 50% of their winter generation capacity. We are talking about fertilizer production that feeds the entire Midwest agricultural belt. And we are talking about the President of the United States, who reportedly learned about the shutoff from a cable news broadcast, not from his own intelligence briefing. In this emergency report, we are going to break down exactly why Canada pulled the kill switch. We are going to follow the money through every pipeline, every contract, and every derivative position that is now hemorrhaging value. We are going to explain why the White House had 72 hours of warning and did nothing. And we are going to answer the question everyone in Washington is afraid to ask. Can the American economy survive a Canadian energy siege in the middle of winter? Buckle up. The lights are about to flicker. To understand why Ottawa moved this morning, you have to understand the financial war that has been raging beneath the surface for the past 6 weeks. It starts with the tariffs. On January 20th, 2026, the Trump administration imposed a 35% across-the-board tariff on all Canadian goods entering the United States. The stated reason was national security. The real reason, according to leaked memos obtained by the Globe and Mail, was retaliation for Canada's refusal to renegotiate the softwood lumber agreement on American terms. Canada responded with retaliatory tariffs of 25% on American agricultural exports. Soybeans, corn, pork, the Farm Belt screamed, but Trump doubled down. On February 14th, the administration escalated to a 50% tariff on Canadian aluminum and steel, effectively killing the automotive supply chain that operates seamlessly across the border. Sources inside the Canadian Prime Minister's office say this was the breaking point. The aluminum tariff alone threatened 40,000 jobs in Quebec, a province the government cannot afford to lose politically. The Canadians warned Washington privately 3 separate times, according to diplomatic cables reviewed by Reuters, that energy would be the next card played. The warnings were ignored. Here is the financial plumbing that makes this catastrophic. The United States imports approximately 8.4 billion cubic feet of natural gas per day from Canada, primarily through 5 major pipeline systems: the Trans-Canada Main Line, the Alliance Pipeline, the Maritimes and Northeast Pipeline, the Iroquois Gas Transmission, the Northern Border Pipeline. Together, these arteries pump roughly $47 million worth of gas per day into the American market, or $17.2 billion per year. That is the direct cost. But here is what nobody is talking about. Natural gas is not just heating fuel, it is the feedstock for the American petrochemical industry. Ethylene production, ammonia synthesis, methanol processing. Roughly 62% of all nitrogen-based fertilizer produced in the United States depends on Canadian natural gas as its primary input. If the gas stops, the fertilizer stops. If the fertilizer stops, the spring planting season is in jeopardy. And if spring planting fails, food prices in the fall will make the 2022 inflation crisis look like a rounding error. The chain reaction is already beginning. Within 4 hours of the announcement, Dow Chemical issued an emergency filing with the SEC, disclosing that its Freeport, Texas facility would begin scaling down ethylene production within 72 hours. CF Industries, the largest nitrogen fertilizer producer in North America, told investors in an 8K filing that it was evaluating a complete shutdown of its Donaldsonville, Louisiana plant, the single largest fertilizer complex in the Western Hemisphere, producing 8.6 million tons annually. The stock dropped 23% in pre-market trading. Koch Fertilizer suspended forward contracts for spring delivery. The CME Group halted trading in natural gas futures twice before 8 a.m. due to circuit breaker limits being triggered. Now let us look at the specific pressure points, the targets that Canada is squeezing. Target 1, the Midwest electrical grid. Michigan, Minnesota, Wisconsin, and parts of Illinois rely on Canadian natural gas for between 35 and 50% of their electrical generation during winter months. The polar vortex that settled over the Great Lakes region last week pushed heating demand to record levels. Without Canadian gas, the grid operators are facing rolling brownouts within 5 to 7 days. The Mid-Continent Independent System Operator, MISO, the agency that manages the grid for 15 states, issued an emergency alert at 7:15 a.m. this morning, warning of potential load-shedding events. That is the technical term for turning off the power to entire neighborhoods to keep the grid from collapsing entirely. Target 2, the Northeast heating market. Roughly 4.2 million households in New England heat with natural gas. The region has almost no pipeline capacity from domestic sources because every major pipeline expansion project has been blocked by environmental litigation for the past decade. New England is effectively a Canadian gas colony. The spot price for natural gas at the Algonquin Citygate hub, the benchmark for New England pricing, hit $38.40 per million BTUs this morning. The 5-year average is $4.20. That is an 814% increase in a single session. Target 3, the petrochemical corridor along the Gulf Coast. This is the hidden vulnerability. The plants in Texas and Louisiana that produce plastics, synthetic rubber, antifreeze, and medical-grade polymers all require methane and ethane feedstock. Approximately 28% of that feedstock comes from Canadian sources via the Alliance pipeline into Chicago and then redistributed south. Without it, production lines go cold within a week. The logic behind Ottawa's move is brutal and calculated. Sources inside the Privy Council office, Canada's equivalent of the National Security Council, describe the strategy in military terms. The phrase reportedly used in the cabinet meeting was controlled economic pressure with escalation dominance. The Canadians are not shutting off all gas permanently. They are reducing flow by 85%, enough to cause systemic pain, but not enough to trigger a humanitarian crisis that would justify American military intervention. The remaining 15% flow is deliberately routed to residential heating in border states to maintain the argument that Canada is not endangering civilian lives. It is a surgical strike on the American industrial economy while preserving plausible deniability on the humanitarian front. The Canadian Energy Minister released a statement at 6:30 a.m. calling the restrictions temporary and reversible, contingent on the immediate removal of all tariffs imposed since January 20th. The statement also cited Article 21 of the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade, the national security exception, using the exact same legal justification that Trump used to impose his tariffs in the first place. The irony is exquisite. Canada is using Trump's own legal weapon against him. This is where the situation moves from economic crisis to constitutional confrontation. Sources inside the West Wing described the mood as unhinged. The president was reportedly watching Fox Business when the crawler announced the Canadian gas shutoff. He called the chief of staff and demanded to know why nobody told him. According to 2 administration officials speaking to the Washington Post, the State Department had received formal diplomatic notice from the Canadian Embassy 72 hours earlier, but the cable was flagged as routine trade correspondence and never escalated to the Oval Office. The system failed. The bureaucracy, hollowed out by 3 years of loyalty purges, simply did not have the institutional capacity to recognize an economic declaration of war when it landed on their desks. By 8 a.m., the president had convened an emergency meeting in the Situation Room. But here is the catch. The options on the table are all terrible. Option 1, military seizure of the pipelines. The Pentagon has contingency plans under the umbrella of continental defense operations for securing critical energy infrastructure in Canada. But executing that plan against a NATO ally, a democracy, a member of the G7, would be an act of war. NATO Article 5 could theoretically be invoked by Canada, calling on European allies to defend it against the United States. The geopolitical fallout would be incalculable. The dollar would collapse. American troops in Europe would be in an impossible position. Sources at the Pentagon say the Joint Chiefs have already communicated to the White House that they will not execute an order to invade Canada over a trade dispute. That message was reportedly delivered verbally to avoid a paper trail. Option 2, emergency domestic gas production surge. The United States produces approximately 103 billion cubic feet of natural gas per day domestically. In theory, there is enough gas. But the pipeline infrastructure does not exist to redirect Appalachian and Permian Basin gas to the Midwest and Northeast in sufficient volume. The bottleneck is not production, it is transportation. Building emergency pipeline interconnections would take 18 to 24 months. Temporary solutions like LNG trucking and rail transport can cover maybe 5 to 8% of the shortfall. It is a band-aid on a severed artery. Option 3, negotiate. Lift the tariffs. Give Canada what it wants. For Donald Trump, this is the nuclear option of a different kind. It is surrender. It is admitting that he picked a fight he could not win. It would be the most humiliating policy reversal of his presidency, and given the Japan bond crisis and the Greenland debacle, it would be the third major retreat in 2 months. Sources say the president told advisors, and this is according to 2 people in the room, that he would rather let Michigan freeze than let Trudeau's replacement make him look weak. That quote, "If it leaks beyond this room," ends his presidency. But it gets worse. The financial contagion from the gas shutoff is already cascading through the derivatives market. Natural gas futures contracts are the backbone of the energy trading complex. Every major bank, every hedge fund, every pension fund that holds energy exposure is repricing risk this morning. Goldman Sachs issued an internal memo obtained by Bloomberg, estimating that the Canadian gas restriction could wipe $340 billion in market value from U.S. equities within the first week if sustained. The volatility index, the VIX, which traders call the fear gauge, spiked to 48.7 this morning. For context, it hit 82 during the 2020 pandemic crash. We are not there yet, but we are on the trajectory. The pension funds, the retirement accounts, the 401k balances of every working American are bleeding in real time. And here is the domino that nobody in Washington is talking about. The natural gas futures market is deeply interconnected with the broader commodities complex through cross-collateralization agreements. When gas prices spike this violently, the margin calls cascade. Traders who are long on gas have to post additional collateral. To raise that collateral, they sell other positions: oil, wheat, copper, gold. The selling becomes self-reinforcing. It is a liquidity death spiral that can crash multiple commodity markets simultaneously. The 2008 financial crisis started with subprime mortgages and metastasized into a global banking collapse. This one starts with Canadian natural gas and could metastasize into a commodity market implosion that makes 2008 look contained. Now let us talk about the political fallout inside the Republican coalition, because this is where the base splits. The MAGA faithful see this as further evidence that the world is trying to destroy Trump. Canada is the enemy. The response should be overwhelming force. Annex Alberta, seize the pipelines, punish the traitors. But the business wing of the party, the Koch network donors, the Chamber of Commerce types, the agricultural conglomerates in Iowa and Nebraska, they see something very different. They see a self-inflicted wound. They see a tariff war that was unnecessary, prosecuted recklessly, with no contingency planning and no exit strategy. Sources close to the Senate Republican leadership say that at least 14 senators have communicated privately to the White House that they will not support any military action against Canada, and that they expect a diplomatic resolution within 72 hours. That is an ultimatum from his own party. The Farm Bureau is already calculating the losses. If Canadian gas stays restricted through March, the fertilizer shortage will delay spring planting by 3 to 4 weeks. That delay, combined with the already late frost patterns caused by climate disruption, could reduce corn yields by 15 to 20% and soybean yields by 12% nationally. The economic impact on the agricultural sector alone would exceed $45 billion. These are Trump voters. These are the people who put him in office. And they are watching their livelihoods evaporate because the president wanted to win a trade war with Canada. What does the rest of the world see when they look at this? They see an empire that cannot keep the lights on. China is watching with particular interest. Beijing has spent the last decade building energy independence through nuclear, solar, and strategic petroleum reserves precisely to avoid this kind of vulnerability. Sources at the Chinese Ministry of Commerce say that internal assessments describe the U.S.-Canada energy rift as a strategic gift. Every day the gas stays off, American industrial competitiveness deteriorates relative to Chinese manufacturing. Putin is watching too. He weaponized energy against Europe in 2022, and Europe survived because it had access to American LNG. Now the Americans are learning what energy dependence feels like. The diplomatic cables out of Moscow, according to European intelligence sources cited by Der Spiegel, describe the situation as divine comedy. The Canadians are doing to America what America told Europe to do to Russia. The irony is so thick you could pipe it through a pipeline. Let us push the scenario to the extreme. The worst case. It is March 15th, 2026. The gas restriction has been in place for 11 days. Michigan has experienced 3 days of rolling blackouts. 2 nursing homes in Grand Rapids lose power during a night when temperatures drop to -14 Fahrenheit. 14 elderly residents die of hypothermia. The images go viral. The governor declares a state of emergency and requests federal assistance. But FEMA is overwhelmed because the Northeast is simultaneously experiencing a heating fuel crisis. Natural gas prices have hit $62 per million BTUs. The average American household heating bill for March is projected at $1,400, up from $180 the previous year. Families are choosing between heating and eating. The fertilizer shortage has forced the USDA to issue a planting delay advisory for the entire Midwest. Commodity traders are pricing in a 30% corn crop reduction. Bread prices are projected to double by September. The political consequences are catastrophic. The president's approval rating drops to 28%, the lowest for any president since Nixon in August 1974. Republican senators begin publicly calling for tariff reversal. 3 cabinet members resign in protest. The phrase constitutional crisis enters the lexicon again, but this time it is about competence, not corruption. Here is the second nightmare scenario. Trump does not back down. Instead, he escalates. He issues an executive order invoking the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, or IEPA, to freeze all Canadian-held assets in the United States, approximately $593 billion in direct investment, and an additional $1.3 trillion in portfolio investment, including Canadian pension fund holdings in American equities and real estate. Canada retaliates by freezing American assets held in Canadian banks and by suspending the NORAD agreement, the Joint Aerospace Defense Command that has protected North American airspace since 1958. For the first time since the Cuban Missile Crisis, North American air defense has a gap. The intelligence sharing between the CIA and CSIS goes dark. The Five Eyes alliance fractures. America's oldest and closest ally becomes a hostile state. And all of it, every single domino, traces back to a 35% tariff on lumber. Let us get technical about what the energy infrastructure actually looks like, because understanding the physical reality is essential. The 5 major pipeline systems that carry Canadian gas into the United States have a combined capacity of approximately 24.6 billion cubic feet per day. Under normal operations, they run at about 34% utilization, carrying the 8.4 billion cubic feet that America imports daily. The remaining capacity exists for peak demand periods and emergency surge. But here's what most analysts miss. These pipelines are not just one-way streets. They are integrated systems with compressor stations, storage facilities, and interconnection points that serve both countries. When Canada restricts flow, it does not just reduce the volume entering the United States, it disrupts the pressure dynamics of the entire network. Compressor stations on the American side that are calibrated for a certain input pressure begin malfunctioning. Storage facilities that depend on steady flow to maintain injection rates cannot operate properly. The technical term is line pack degradation. The pipeline does not just carry less gas, it becomes less efficient at carrying any gas at all. This means the actual reduction in available supply is worse than the headline 85% cut suggests. Pipeline engineers at the American Gas Association estimate the effective supply reduction at closer to 91% once line pack degradation is factored in. The grid is not just hurt, it is functionally severed. History teaches us that nations which weaponize trade without understanding the reciprocal vulnerabilities always lose. The Smoot-Hawley tariff of 1930 was supposed to protect American industry. It triggered a global trade war that deepened the Great Depression by 2 to 3 years and cost the global economy an estimated $4 trillion in today's dollars. The Arab oil embargo of 1973 was supposed to punish the West for supporting Israel. It created the petrodollar system and ultimately made the Middle East more dependent on American military protection than ever before. History does not repeat, but it rhymes. The founders of the North American free trade system understood something that this administration has forgotten. Canada and the United States are not just trading partners, they are a single integrated economic organism. The border is an administrative fiction for economic purposes. You cannot sever the left hand from the right hand and expect the body to function. The Constitution gives the president the power to regulate foreign commerce, but it does not give him the power to regulate reality. The reality is that 8.4 billion cubic feet of natural gas per day cannot be replaced by executive order, by tweet, or by threat. The physics of pipelines do not care about politics. This is not just an energy crisis. This is the stress test of the entire American economic model. Can a country that outsourced its energy security to a neighbor, it then antagonized, survive the consequences? Can the political system course correct before the physical system collapses? Can the markets absorb the shock without triggering a broader financial contagion that makes the Japan bond crisis look like a warm-up act? We are in uncharted territory. The maps are useless. The playbook does not exist for a scenario where the United States is energy besieged by Canada. The absurdity of the situation is itself a measure of how far off course this administration has drifted. As we head into the trading session, watch the natural gas spot prices. If they break above $50 per million BTUs by close, the utility companies will have no choice but to implement emergency rationing protocols. Watch the agricultural futures. If corn and soybean contracts continue their collapse, the Farm Bureau will go public with their opposition to the tariffs, and that breaks the political coalition that keeps this administration in power. Watch the Canadian dollar. If it strengthens against the US dollar, the market is telling you that Canada is winning this war. Watch the Pentagon. If Northcom issues any unusual deployment orders or if military transport aircraft are spotted moving toward bases near the Canadian border, this has escalated beyond economics. And watch the president's Truth Social feed. The silence is more dangerous than the noise. If he goes quiet, it means the lawyers have taken over and something dramatic is being prepared. It will not be a tariff adjustment. It will be an executive order or a National Guard deployment or a declaration of national emergency that rewrites the rules of North American commerce overnight. For 180 million Americans who heat their homes, power their factories, and grow their food with energy that flows from the north, this is personal. This is not abstract geopolitics. This is the thermostat on your wall. This is the price at the grocery store. This is the job at the plant that depends on feedstock that is no longer arriving. The pipeline is the lifeline, and the lifeline has been cut. Subscribe. Stay close. We will be covering this around the clock as the situation develops. The history books will record this week as the moment the North American Energy Alliance shattered. Whether it can be rebuilt depends on what happens in the next 72 hours. The valve is shut. The pressure is dropping, and the coldest week of winter is just beginning.